Hello, and welcome to Legal Careers at the EPA. My name is Caitlin McCarthy, and I'm the Director of Education, Associates, and Corporate Partnerships here at the Environmental Law Institute. I'm delighted to welcome everyone to this public webinar co-sponsored by the Environmental Protection Agency. At the end of today's webinar, we will have time for a question and answer session. On GoToWebinar, please submit your questions using GoTo's question box, and please do not wait until the end. Send your questions as soon as you think of them. Real-time transcription is available for this event. To access the transcription, please go to the URL that I will put in the chat as soon as we're done with opening remarks. I would like to take a moment to thank our outstanding panelists for joining us today to lend their expertise to this webinar. While they will be introduced momentarily, the full speaker bios are posted on our website, eli.org, and I would encourage you to check out their expertise in more detail there. I would also like to thank the EPA team for their many efforts putting together today's program, especially to the panelists and moderator you see here, as well as to Abi Viajanye, as well as Seth Buxbaum. To begin, I would like to warmly welcome today's expert moderator, Ryland Lee, an attorney advisor in the Office of General Counsel of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. He counsels the agency on the Clean Air Act and administrative law issues. Ryland is also the co-chair of the steering committee of the DC Bar's Environment, Energy, and Natural Resources Community. Previously, Ryland clerked for the Chief Judge Jeffrey Howard of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the First Circuit. He received his bachelor's degree in economics and government from Dartmouth College and his JD from Harvard Law School, where he was also an editor on the Harvard Environmental Law Review. Ryland, we're so thrilled to have you here, and with that, I will turn things over to you.
Thanks so much, Caitlin, and welcome everybody again to today's event on legal careers at EPA. I wanted to start off by giving my heartfelt thanks to Caitlin as well as the other staff at ELI for hosting today's event and making all of this possible, and also extend my thanks to each of the panelists, Didi, Amanda, Kelly, and Merrick, for being here and graciously offering your time and wisdom to our audience. I also want to thank the many staff at EPA who work together to make this event possible, especially to my colleagues on the planning team, Seth Buxbaum and Abi Vijayan. And thank you all to each of you in the audience for taking time to be here to learn about the EPA and what it's like to be an attorney here. So our event today is titled Legal Careers at EPA, and fittingly, we have a wonderfully diverse panel of attorneys to talk about what it's like to work here, what they do, as well as how do you get a job here. Our panelists today represent a diverse cross-section, both in terms of our personal and professional backgrounds, as well as in the kind of work that we do at the agency. Although we're all attorneys, we actually do quite different things at EPA. Before I introduce each of them, let me give you a quick overview of our remaining 85 minutes or so. So we will have a moderated panel with some prepared questions for about an hour. And then, as Caitlin mentioned earlier, you all have the opportunity to answer questions using to ask questions using GoToWebinar. And for the last 20 minutes or so of our event, I will be posing those questions to the panelists. Please note that we are here today to talk about legal careers, and that is the only thing we're authorized to talk about. So we unfortunately won't be able to answer any questions about agency policies or rulemakings or about the election or any political candidates. Those are beyond the scope. I probably also won't get to all the questions just because there's over 200 of you right now and we only have 20 minutes, but you can always follow up with us after the event. And we'll end in the last 5 or 10 minutes by talking about some job opportunities and internship opportunities that we are hiring for right now at the agency. So with that, let me get started by introducing each of the panelists. My apologies. Give me just one second. All right, I'm sorry about that. Okay, here we go. So we're going to go in alphabetical order, starting with Aditi Prabhu. Aditi is the Acting Assistant General Counsel for the Regulatory Issues Practice Group in the Office of General Counsel at the EPA. She manages a group of attorneys, including me, who provide legal counsel to all programs and offices of the agency on administrative law, rulemaking procedures and statutes, and defense of litigation issues. She previously served as the Special Assistant to EPA Office of General Counsel's leadership team. And before she joined EPA in 2011, she was an associate at Gibson Dunn in Washington, D.C. She received her AB in biology, summa cum laude, from Harvard College, and a JD from the Yale Law School. And speakers, I'm actually hearing some background noise from one of you, so if folks don't mind muting when you're not talking, that would be appreciated. Thank you. Our second speaker is Amanda Urban. Amanda is Assistant Regional Counsel in EPA's regional office in Chicago. Her interdisciplinary docket of permitting and enforcement cases includes attention to Superfund sites of emphasis, Clean Air Act mobile source enforcement, and underground injection control permitting. Amanda has also worked on detail in EPA's Office of General Counsel. There, she focused on rulemaking efforts and defense of litigation in the Clean Water Act, Section 402 and 404 units. Before joining EPA, she clerked on the Michigan Supreme Court and also in the Eastern District of Michigan. She served as a legal fellow at a nonprofit organization in Spain and was a trial attorney at a small law firm. Amanda is from the Great Lakes State and is a proud double Wolverine from the University of Michigan. Our third speaker is Kelly Ortega. Kelly is an attorney advisor in EPA's Office of Enforcement and Compliance Assurance, Office of Civil Enforcement, Air Enforcement Division. She works with the Department of Justice to prosecute and resolve violations of the Clean Air Act by stationary sources and automobile manufacturers. She also serves as EPA's enforcement representative on rulemakings involving the Clean Air Act. Prior to joining EPA, Kelly was an associate at a major law firm where she had a broad environmental litigation, transactional, and regulatory practice that crossed media and statutes with a focus on climate change and renewable energy. And our fourth and final speaker is Merrick Cozy. Merrick resides in Washington, D.C. and has served as an employment law attorney at the EPA Office of General Counsel in the General Law Office since 2015. He advises agency management officials concerning a wide array of employment matters, including disciplinary actions and claims of discrimination. In addition, he represents the agency in defense of litigation associated with these actions and claims. Before EPA, Merrick served as Assistant General Counsel and FOIA Officer for the DC Department of Motor Vehicles and an Assistant Attorney General for the DC Office of the Attorney General. Merrick is a native of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and a cum laude graduate of the Southern University Law Center. He also holds a LLM in Labor and Employment Law from Atlanta's John Marshall University. So if we were all in the room together, I'd ask you guys to give a big round of applause for our panelists, but since we're not, please imagine that applause in your head and welcome them warmly today. So panelists, I'd like to get us started just by asking each of you to take a few minutes to tell the audience about your background before you got to EPA, as well as a little bit more about the work you do. And for this first question, we can go in alphabetical order by first name. So Aditi, we'll start with you.
Sure. Thanks, Ryland, and thanks for the opportunity to be here talking to this group today. So I've had a long interest in environmental issues. I'm one of those people. I read that book, 50 Things Kids Can Do to Save the Earth, and I don't know if that book is still around, but it sort of set me on my path. So I was a biology major in college, and I became interested in the intersection of sort of science and policy. I went to law school wanting to do environmental law or work on environmental issues. And I spent a summer at another federal agency working in environmental law. After law school, I worked at a law firm, and I actually had a much broader practice. I was doing sort of litigation across a number of different areas, trying to get a sense of what else was out there. I was there for 3 years, and then I came to EPA, initially to the Water Law Office, where I worked on a number of sort of Clean Water Act, Safe Drinking Water Act issues. In terms of what I do at EPA, Rylan kind of mentioned this in the intro, but I'm in an office within the Office of General Counsel that's called the Cross-Cutting Issues Law Office. It kind of does what its name probably sounds like, but my group works on a number of issues that come up during rulemaking. We advise other lawyers within EPA, and then also a number of programs across the agency on the Administrative Procedure Act, rulemaking requirements, litigation, and a number of other kind of alphabet soup of statutes and executive orders. And we also work on some rulemakings and other initiatives that cut across kind of different programs across the agency.
Thanks, Aditi. And on to you, Amanda.
Hi, everyone. As mentioned in my bio, I grew up in Michigan. While I was always pretty interested in law school, environmental issues started to hit home for me when I was in undergraduate. Around that time, the world's largest inland oil spill occurred in Kalamazoo, Michigan, where I'm from. So that event kind of shook my community and got me thinking about environmental issues. Shortly after that, like Aditi, I had this time a documentary, not a book, but some sort of educational material that really pushed that passion forward. So the documentary Flow got me thinking about water rights and the legality of water distribution. So that pushed me to pursue environmental issues in law school. I spent a summer with EPA in their regional office in Region 2 in New York. I also spent a summer at a major law firm in Chicago doing environmental work, which was a good, I think, broad, diverse types of practice and getting to see all different sides of environmental issues. So I definitely recommend that, getting to explore different positions that people take on environmental issues for different reasons. I did a variety of things after law school. Michigan used to have this wonderful program called the Summer Starters, where we would start in June and graduate in December. But that program often left us with a gap because most employers start new employees in September or October. So I had a clerkship lined up, but I had a little bit of gap time, and that's when I did my fellowship, which was a great experience to see how other countries deal with environmental problems, getting to work in Spain and seeing how the EU tackles some of the same environmental issues we're facing. Really helped me to think creatively about environmental problems. Then after my clerkship, I started with EPA's Office of Regional Counsel in Chicago. And so in the regional offices, we are sort of an arm of the Office of Compliance, Office of Enforcement and Compliance Assurance, which Kelly is going to be telling you about. And the reason we're sort of an arm of that office is because a big part of our job is enforcement. So I am at the beginning stages of environmental cases. I work with scientists and engineers, incredibly smart people who have PhDs and master's degrees in chemistry, biology, environmental studies, engineering. And so those folks will investigate various claims of environmental law violations. I will work with them to evaluate the evidence. determine whether we think a particular respondent is violating an environmental law, how we're going to pursue that violation, and then ultimately how we're going to resolve that violation, whether it be through a settlement or through some kind of action before an ALJ or a district court. The other part of my job is permitting. So that involves both oversight of the issuance of permits and vetting permit applications, as well as enforcement to make sure that entities are applying for the correct permits and have the right terms in their permits and are following them. So I think that pretty much covers a little taste of regional work.
I think I'm next. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here to talk about my job at EPA and my path getting here. I'm excited. So my environmental journey began when I was a child. My mom used to play nature videos for me, and I fell in love with humpback whales, and I wanted to swim with them. I needed, however, a little more of a secure financial path than being a marine biologist, and so I became an environmental lawyer, which helped me pair some of my childhood interests with a job that would put me on a sound financial footing. I went to UC Berkeley for my undergraduate degree. I had two very Berkeley majors. One was in environmental economics and policy, and one was in conservation and resource studies. After that, I did a master's degree in public and international affairs with a certificate in science, technology, environment, and public policy at Princeton University. Happily, the school has since dropped the Woodrow Wilson name and tainted legacy, but you can see a trend line through my educational path. After law school, I went and worked in private practice for 7 years, as Rylan mentioned. It was a lot of fun. I thought seriously about staying, but I'd always had a really strong drive towards public service. And so I explored opportunities, and when the right one presented itself, came over to EPA. In my job in the enforcement office, I have two channels to my work. On the one hand, I serve as a prosecutor, working with the regional offices like Amanda and the Department of Justice on litigating and or settling cases. So that's a very traditional lawyer day-to-day kind of task, calls, drafting, etc. And the other aspect of my work is more policy oriented, which is something that I couldn't do when I was in the private sector, and I'm thrilled to be able to do at EPA. So sometimes that policy work involves major rulemakings under the Clean Air Act. Sometimes it involves more day-to-day practical elements of what makes the best enforcement policy. That's the other major dimension of my work.
Merrick, on to you.
All righty. Well, as my bio, I am Merrick Cozy. I am a native of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, so I typically talk about food. I like to cook gumbo and etouffee. I like crawfish and probably any other shellfish that you can think of. So I am a seafood fanatic, probably because I was born and raised in that type of environment. My journey to EPA is probably unique as well. I do practice employment law in the Office of General Counsel within the General Law Office. And I actually first got interested in employment law when I took an employment law class my 2L year. It was focused more on Title VII discrimination cases, doing a well-rounded view of other employment laws, such as the Americans with Disabilities Act, et cetera. And I learned first about EPA actually through on-campus interviews. My career counselor knew that I wanted to do employment law. We were very close, and we always talked about that class. And when I saw that EPA was on the lineup, she saw that I didn't apply for an interview. And she said, "Why didn't you apply?" I was like, I don't know how Environmental Protection Agency blends with employment law. And so she says, "But they have to have employees, right? So then there must be employment law." So I said, "You know what? I never thought about it that way." And so I applied for an interview through OCI, on campus interviews, and I got one. And there I learned all about the general law office and employment law. And I was excited and was offered the opportunity to participate in the summer honors program, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit later. But I joined in my 2L year, absolutely loved it. I landed in the Civil Rights and Finance Law Office, but I was more focused on the Title VII employment discrimination side of the house, wherein that, I guess, subunit of the Civil Rights and Finance Law Office drafts final agency decisions with respect to claims of discrimination. So it was right up my alley. At that time, the EPA wasn't hiring at the completion of my 3.0 year and graduating and passing the bar. So I immediately transitioned to the DC Office of the Attorney General, where I focused on a portfolio of just general commercial litigation. Stayed there about maybe 8 months and then transitioned to the DC Office of Motor Vehicles, and you'll be surprised of the number of issues that you can see from DMV. Everybody has had their experience with the DMV somewhere, but it was a really unique experience because I was more of a generalist. Everything's from, when someone passes away, the vehicle has to go somewhere, right? Probably to someone's estate, to bankruptcy, right? There's vehicles that get caught up in bankruptcy issues. Titling vehicles, everything you can name, I dealt with, including employment law, where they had a very, very strong union. So I got a touch also of labor negotiations and also labor practice. And then I got an email that EPA was hiring for an employment lawyer. And I jumped on it right away. Went through the process, saw some familiar names that I knew. I had done work for them while I was in the civil rights office, and at the end of the day, I got the job. So right now, I practice employment law. I consider my portfolio to be about 2 buckets. The first bucket is the advice buckets. I advise agency management on a host of issues. Anything that touches the employee, I'll probably get a call about, whether it be potential disciplinary action, whether it be the Family Medical Leave Act, unique issues with HR policies, I review those. I also advise on other type of diversity and inclusion initiatives through the Office of Civil Rights. So just think about anything that touches the employee, I advise agency management on. The second bucket is a litigation bucket, and it's an administrative litigation. Obviously, employees who are disciplined can appeal, or who have certain discrimination claims can appeal those claims to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission or to the Merit Systems Protection Board. If there's a labor grievance, they can appeal to arbitration, which could be before the Federal Labor Relations Authority. So I provide defensive litigation from cradle to grave. That includes depositions, that includes discovery, interrogatories, anything that you would generally probably see in a trial court setting. You'll see it in the administrative setting. And finally, if the case does go to district court litigation, obviously the Department of Justice is the litigation arm in federal courts. But the advantage is I do get to sit as a very close second chair to assistant United States attorneys, where I work closely with them on trial litigation and litigation strategy, and we litigate the case in federal district court together from cradle to grave as well. So I'm kind of the non-environmental attorney, although I do love everything that my cohorts do in the environmental, kind of in the media law offices as well. I have an appreciation and even a stronger interest in what they do, because obviously I have to learn their side of the business in order to kind of litigate a number of my cases.
Thanks, Merrick, and thanks everybody for introducing yourself. What an amazing range of stuff we all do. I'll share a little bit about my own path as well. So I went into law school, maybe unfortunately, not having a super clear of idea of what I wanted to do. And it was only after my first year summer, when I was working at a U.S. attorney's office doing criminal work, and realized, this is important work, but probably not it for me, that I really kind of sat down and did some serious reflection about what was important to me and what I wanted to do and what my job prospects were. And environmental law was the thing I picked, in part because I took some classes in environmental law, administrative law, really enjoyed those. In large part because I went to events like this, or cold emailed or cold called people who were environmental lawyers and asked them about their jobs, and just felt like what they were talking about was really interesting, and that the people who I talked to also seemed to be really, really interesting. And then there were some experiences kind of in my background that definitely led me on this path as well. Some of those experiences were having profoundly positive and maybe even spiritual experiences in nature, just feeling an overwhelming sense of peace and beauty, and wanting other people, both now and in future generations, to have that same opportunity, and so wanting to work in environmental protection for that reason. I've also had some very negative experiences with the environment. I was born in China, in Beijing, and immigrated to the United States when I was a child. And I think folks know Beijing has pretty bad air. Many cities around the world have pretty bad air, and I went back to China in college for study abroad experience, and kind of re-experienced that for myself as an adult, and felt very strongly that things like clean air and clean water, and living in a place that isn't filled with toxins, basically, these things are really basic human rights that shouldn't be provided to somebody based on how much income they have or their status, but should be universally given to everybody. So that was another big reason for me why I ended up in the environmental field. And the last thing I'll mention in terms of my reasons is a more kind of philosophical or maybe theological one, of believing that we as human beings are part of the Earth community, that we are an important part of that community, but we are also just one part of that community, and we have obligations to other species and to the land, and that the nature that's in our backyard and that's in the wilderness isn't just out there for us to consume and use, but they're also members of our community that we have obligations to, that we should take care of, and that we should live in harmony with. So all that kind of led me to do environmental work, and the reason I picked EPA was I had done some litigation work as a law student, as a summer associate at a law firm. Found it intellectually stimulating, but I thought, I think I want to be building policies as opposed to fighting over, policies or contracts or things like that after they're done. So I wanted to be in a regulatory space, and I also saw the really outstanding work EPA was doing, and all the work that EPA was doing at the time in the air and climate space. which is what led me to my current position now, where I mostly do climate and air pollution control work. A little bit more about what I do now. So I work on three different areas. The first is I regulate transportation fuels, and specifically renewable fuels. So this is like when you go to the gas station and you pump gas and you see the label that says 10% ethanol. That is what I work on regulating. Another thing I do is visibility protection in national parks and wilderness areas. And this means, like, say you go to the Grand Canyon, you have this beautiful vista of the Grand Canyon, but on that day, there's just a lot of haze in the air that's being generated by power plants many miles away, and that's blocking your view. So there's a part of the Clean Air Act that specifically addresses this issue, and I help implement that to protect visibility, as well as to gain all the public health benefits from reducing air pollution emissions. The last thing I do is I work in Aditi's group, and she already told you guys a little bit about that. I would say that my share of the work often entails working on extremely obscure issues on very not obscure rules. So I work on rules that I think folks who are familiar with EPA will definitely have heard about, like the Affordable Clean Energy Rule, or the Clean Power Plan, its predecessor, or the Waters of the United States rule. But then I work on this super obscure issue of federal jurisdiction that people don't think about for each of those. So that's a little bit more about what I do. And with that, we'll move on to our next question. So panelists, we've each told the audience a lot about our background and kind of how we got to the agency. Next question is about how do you think your background, whether that's kind of your educational and work background, or your demographics or other interests that you had, how does that, if at all, influence you at your work, and how does that shape how you perform your job? And folks, feel free to take this in any order.
So, I mean, I'll jump in. I guess for me, I don't know if you can probably tell, but I'm probably a very kind of energetic and outgoing person, because I just love people, right? Prior to law school, I was kind of the non-traditional student. I ran call centers for 8 years, so you can kind of imagine what you might get in a call center setting of about 1,000 people who have to sit in the same room for 8 hours and deal with angry customers who just want to know why their cable is cut off, for example. But anyway, I rose through the ranks in the call center operations world and became a senior operations manager in a large portfolio that I had was human resources, just managing people, kind of that whole 9 yards. And I think that background translate in probably into why I gravitated towards employment law, because at EPA, unlike my colleagues who might focus on specific areas of a statute or a particular environmental statute or some other portfolio, people tease me because they say, Merrick, you must know everybody in EPA. It's because under the employment law umbrella, you work with so many people. Every case that we get is different. Because I'm out of headquarters, I get an opportunity to really communicate and work with managers across all regions. So that's all the United States. In addition, in some instances, I get to travel to the regions. And so I like it because I get a chance to bring in that people element, right? I get a chance to kind of bring in that aspect that you never know what you're going to get in human resources. And that's what I like about the work. It's always a different set of facts and a different set of events, even though you might be applying the same law. I never get bored. My colleagues and I always talk shop, and we always say, you will not believe what just happened or what I have to now deal with in a new case. And so I like that because it keeps the work interesting, and it kind of keeps me from maybe getting burnt out, which in the legal profession, I think it's really easy to do, right? You're constantly researching, using your brain, writing, and those types of things. And so I think that's probably where I draw the connection as far as my background and the work that I do today.
I can jump in. So I think coming straight from a district court clerkship certainly had a lot of influence on me. My judge had 7 jury trials while I was there, which was more than he had had in the previous 5 years combined. So when I'm looking at a case, I mean, I'm starting at the roots. I'm going all the way back to the statute, looking, where's the statutory provision that authorizes this cause of action. Then I'm digging through our regs. Okay, what are the elements of proof that I'm going to have to show under the regs? And then, do we have, certainly we do, some sort of policy guidance document that speaks to those regs, and working with my client to piece together the evidence that we have from the inspection report or a request for information or a tip we received on our hotline, and shoring up my case and making sure that before I, representing the federal government, go out and tell someone that I think they have violated a law, that I have met my responsibility as the government to know that I have good cause to do that, and that I'm making sure that I've crossed my T's and dotted my I's, so that when I, get into that case 6 months, a year down the line, I'm not all of a sudden bombarded by, oh, well, actually, this regulation doesn't even apply to us. Because if you had gone all the way back to the statute, you would see it only applies to this type of operator, or it only applies to persons. And the way the Act defines persons, as basic of a concept as that might seem, excludes us for some reason or another. So I think having that district court experience really influences me to always be looking at the very, very basics before getting too far down the line.
I can jump in. So I would say one thing from my background, as I mentioned, I've had a longstanding interest in environmental issues. And when I was in high school, I worked for and volunteered for a couple of local environmental organizations in central New Jersey, where I grew up. And it's helped, and they were focused mostly on water quality and the quality of local streams and tributaries in that area, and then the impacts from water quality issues in those streams. And one of the things I think that it's helped me keep in mind is, a lot of the work we do at EPA, and especially in headquarters, it is obviously at the national level, right? Working on putting in place a regulatory structure and program implementation. And then sometimes the specific kind of angles or issues we work on as lawyers, as Rylan mentioned, like can be sort of arcane. And it's helped me sort of to keep in mind that in the end, I mean, what happens at the high level matters, but it also matters what all the practical impacts are. How communities are affected, what happens on the ground, if those impacts aren't always the same everywhere due to kind of confluence of other factors and issues. So I think that's one thing that's helped me kind of keep some perspective, having sort of had some of that more local exposure. I had also spent a summer when I was in college working at the State Department of Environmental Protection, where I was working on brownfield redevelopment. And so again, that was sort of very localized, like trying to turn these contaminated sites into something positive and reusable. And so I view that a little bit as sort of kind of in step with what we do, maybe the flip side of what we do. But we're trying to, put in place a structure that does work for everyone and everywhere. And there is kind of a lot of factors and a lot of impacts to think about.
I'll go ahead and round things out. I think what you're hearing here today is a couple of things. First, there's no one path to a successful career at EPA. We all came from different places and found our spot here at the agency. Similarly, there's no one person that's right for a job at EPA. Again, we've all had different life experiences and we're bringing them to our work at the agency. And that's one of the things that I enjoy the most about the day-to-day work on the job. It's just a very pleasant place to work because we've all come from different places and we're sharing our experiences. My path took me through the private sector, and that was great for me. I learned a lot. I established a reputation as an attorney in the field. I brought that with me. It's been invaluable in my current practice to be able to walk into a room with major corporations, outside counsel, and have that credential sort of already preceding me through the door. It helps you be comfortable in the setting, sure, but maybe more importantly, it helps the group on the other side of the table be comfortable with me, and that helps me get my job done. So coming through private practice was fantastic for my current job, enforcing violations of the Clean Air Act. That was my path. Others have come from positions in the nonprofit field, and they've brought that experience with them. And they're part of the teams that I work on a day-to-day basis in my cases. So there's no one path, and frankly, it's never too late. If you're in a job right now that you're enjoying, but you're interested in trying something else out as well, it's never too late to look at the EPA as a potential career option. I was in private practice for a while, so before I decided to make the move.
Thanks, everybody. And Kelly, great sales pitch right there. If I were in the audience, I'd be gearing up to apply right now. Yeah, I totally echo what you say that there's like no one person that's fit for this job, but it can be right for you. And when I look at my own experience, this may seem kind of like a cop-out as an answer to the question, but I really do feel like almost everything I've done in my life has some type of positive impact on my work now. So for instance, in college, I studied political science and economics, and a lot of the work I do now actually involves economics because we are regulating market entities. In some cases, we're using various kind of economic tools to regulate the market, and I'm counseling about the legal aspects of those tools. So it's really helpful to understand the underlying economics. Like Amanda, I was also a judicial law clerk before my time at EPA. I clerked on the Court of Appeals, and that has been super helpful for my job because maybe a third to half of my work involves litigation in the DC Circuit, which is primarily driven by the Department of Justice, but on which I also have a substantial role. And having that clerkship experience not only allows me to provide better advice, but it also gives my clients more confidence that I know what I'm talking about because I've been there in the judge's chambers, like counseling the judge, writing those opinions, so they have more confidence in the advice I give them. I'll also mention a couple other things which may seem kind of random. So one of them is that I'm an introvert. And why am I mentioning that? Well, I feel like sometimes when people think of law and being an advocate, we think, oh, you have to like to talk a lot and like just be really have a lot to say. And extroverts are great. Merrick, I love it that you're on this panel. But I actually feel like being an introvert is very helpful in some ways. For instance, I can go to a meeting and I will not be the first person to talk, but I will be maybe the last person to talk, having listened to what everybody else has said, and then kind of turning all that information around in my head and synthesizing that knowledge and offering something to the group that is equally as valuable. Another thing that might sound kind of random is I practice mindfulness meditation, and that is so helpful for a number of reasons, but one of them is that it helps me to stay very calm when there's a lot of pressure, which can happen a lot when you're working on policies that have huge economic impact, and there might be very determined and or angry people at the other side of the table, or it might just be somebody like the administrator or the general counsel like asking me a long series of very hard questions. And I need to be able to, stay calm and really focus during that. And mindfulness really helps me with that. All right. Well, the next question, I think we've already answered in this sense, but it is a question that gets asked a lot, and I actually see a couple of people asking this in the Q&A already, so I'll just raise it now, which is how important is it to have a background or a degree in environmental science or some other kind of hard science for your work at EPA?
I can start things off here. It's helpful, but it is certainly not critical. What is critical to succeeding in a job at EPA is being interested in the work and being willing to engage in the technical details. That is, if you're doing the more traditional environmental work that I do. I work on a daily basis with engineers and environmental scientists, and I need to be willing to really dig in and understand the work that they do. Everything that we do is done in teams, and our teams are strongest when we have not self-siloed, when we are not identifying certain tasks as an engineer's job or a scientist's job or a lawyer's job. We're best as a team when we're working across those lines and really trying to understand each other's aspect of the bigger picture, the bigger project. So as long as you're willing to do the work on the job to get up to speed, you can come in with any sort of credential.
I would echo that. I don't have any science background really whatsoever. I think I took maybe geology in undergrad. And while I think it's extremely helpful to have that background, and it certainly will put you ahead of the curve, if you don't have that background, you just need to put in the time and effort. I mean, I will spend on any given case, an hour, multiple hours. The other day, I spent 2 hours with one of my Clean Air Act engineers, having him explain the finer details of a certain exhaust function on a truck. But by the end of it, I understood what I needed to in order to be an effective lawyer for him. So if you're willing to put in that time and effort to understand enough of the science and technical side of things to be an effective advocate, then that's really all I think you need to do.
I would agree with that as well. I feel like there's a lot. I mean, EPA is full of specialists in all different fields, and you'll be working with all of those people. That's actually, I feel like, one of the best parts of the job, getting to work with a lot of non-attorneys and people with different types of expertise. So even in my first week at EPA, I was part of a rulemaking work group that had toxicologists, epidemiologists, economists. I've worked with engineers and environmental scientists, biologists, sort of the full gamut. And I think they're bringing all of that kind of expertise. I think it's exciting to get to be part of that. I mean, compared to my previous job at a law firm, obviously most of the people you're working with, both your sort of your colleagues and your clients, tend to be a lot of lawyers. So it is a really neat experience to get to work with a lot of other types of people. I would also say that a big part of it, like others have mentioned, is kind of the legal skills you bring to the job, but also kind of the mindset. So feeling like you're part of a team, have a problem-solving approach, trying to figure out what are what are we all trying to accomplish here? How can we be part of that? How can we help make it successful? So I think it's less about sort of your specific sort of technical background and more about sort of what your interests are, a little bit of like your work style, what you're looking for in your kind of day-to-day interactions, and yeah, and sort of being part of that kind of team.
Great. And I'll add to that briefly and say, as somebody without a hard science background, I feel like in some ways that actually benefits me, because the briefs we write, right, and the rulemaking documents we issue, those are read by non-specialists. So litigation briefs, for instance, are read by generalists, Article 3 judges, and law clerks who are 25 years old and don't know much about environmental law. So it's actually really helpful to be kind of a layman from the technical perspective to explain really difficult, complex technical concepts using simple language that kind of the average person can understand. All right, so just a time check, it's about 1:20. I think we'll do about maybe 15 or 20 minutes more prepared questions before we jump into the Q&A. So our next question shifts from background to what we're doing in our jobs right now. And it is, what would you say is the best thing about your current role and the most difficult thing about your current role?
I can go first again. I think the best thing about my job is, well, it's actually fairly unique to my position within EPA. I don't have a traditional client. And as an attorney, that's really rare. In most legal positions, you work at the direction of your client. In the Office of General Counsel, it'll often be a program office. In private practice, it was a private company for any given case. But in EPA, I get to work as a practicing attorney, draft documents, negotiate, do witness interviews. But to the extent that I serve anyone, it's actually all of you, the general public. I, together with my management, find my own direction. We do work to develop strategies for areas in which we'll explore cases, and then we explore cases in that realm. But when it comes back to service, it's always serving you. I don't have to do something just because an engineer tells me to do it. And so that's a lot of fun. And I think that's unique to my position within the Office of Enforcement and Compliance Assurance. What are some of the most challenging aspects of my job? Well, they're pretty mundane, actually. At EPA, we don't have a lot of administrative resources. We don't really have any in OECA. This includes even IT support. So when a printer breaks, back when we were in the office and had things like printers, we would fix the printer. So you learn how to do things like that on the job. If you're interested in a fancy corner office or a nifty parking space, EPA is probably not the place for you. But if you're interested in quality work and work that changes and is exciting on a daily basis, then it might be. And if you're an attorney who's a little tired of client services, maybe my office might be a nice opportunity for you.
I'll chime in. I think probably there are 2 or 3 things that I love the most about the work. The first is probably my management. I think most people are dissatisfied with their jobs generally because of management or supervisor. And I will say that EPA, not just with my management, but because I work with a number of management officials, they genuinely care about the people that they lead. And I think it's important to have that. And when I say, care about, for example, your own personal career growth, right? One of the things that led me to get my LLM in employment and labor law is because, I just wanted to know more. And I was able to sit down, with my management and say, these are my interests. This is what I love to do. This is where I want to go. And it's always, how can we help you get there? So if you're looking for a place that provides you kind of with that incubator for growth, um, training opportunities, and just a whole gamut of things that I just simply enjoy the fact that I know that even when I'm not around, my management team has my best interests at heart, both personally and professionally. And I think that's the lead in maybe to my second point, personally. The work-life balance at EPA is phenomenal to me. I very rarely carry stress home with me. The traditional work hours are what they are. They are very respectful of your personal time. It's not like you have to be glued to a computer or a cell phone after hours, although there might be some instances, where you just want to kind of put in a little extra work. But for the most part, if you need to take an extended vacation or they're very respectful of that. And I think you need that balance, especially when you're, dealing with, for me, a large portfolio of cases. I mean, I can have maybe at any point, I don't know, 10 to 15 active matters that require for you to juggle back and forth. At some point, you need a moment to exhale, and EPA management and leadership recognize kind of that balance. And I have an appreciation for that. And then, so switching over to probably that which could be challenging sometimes. I spoke a lot about, in employment law, you really have the human element. And there are some instances where you kind of see what people go through when they're not at work. And it touches your heart, right? It makes it difficult. Even though I'm, pretty much a defense attorney for the agency, it doesn't remove that kind of heart of service or that heart element that you just feel for people who go through a number of issues that affect them both on the job and off the job. I will tell you that when I encounter those situations, it's hard for me, right? It's really hard to deal with. And if there's any struggle that I take away from the job, sometimes it's that. But again, you kind of learn how to manage and deal with it, and you move the best way you can. So that would be kind of my pros and maybe a challenge in my work at EPA.
All right.
All right, I'll jump in.
Oh, go ahead,
I
Amanda.
was going to let Aditi jump ahead of me, but that's okay. I can jump in. The benefits or the pros are a lot, so I'm just going to try to ding them off because I feel like there's too many. I often wake up and I'm like, how did I get to do exactly what I wanted to do, like going into law school? I feel very blessed. So my practice is pretty unique, sort of like Kelly's in the sense that it's rare to find. You can find it in other places in the agency, but my practice is what you would call either interdisciplinary or multimedia. So I get to work with all of the environmental statutes. I will be doing a RCRA case one day, a Clean Water Act case the next day. Then I'll be over working on a Superfund site the following week. So I am all over the gambit as far as the environmental statutes, which makes it constantly interesting and exciting. And if I choose to be a little more specialized, like I am in the Clean Air Act Mobile Source Enforcement Work Group, so I tend to take on more of those cases, and I'm in the Clean Water Act 402 permitting group, so I tend to take on more of those cases. But I don't have to do that. It's very flexible, and to have that kind of broad, flexible practice I think is pretty rare anywhere else outside of EPA. But with that is a lot of autonomy, which is exciting. I mean, I am running my cases. I am the only attorney. I am, making all of the legal calls with my client. I am doing all of the work, the writing, the research, everything. So, I mean, on the good side, I get to do all the substantive stuff. On the bad side, if there's discovery or there's FOIA or there's stuff that would otherwise go to a paralegal or maybe a legal assistant, doc reviewing, formatting, I'm doing all of that. So kind of like Kelly said, you learn to be resourceful. And then the last benefit that Merritt kind of touched on a little bit is I just don't think that you can beat our work-life balance combined with our benefits and our salary. If you want to know more details on those sorts of things, like feel free to reach out to me or another EPA attorney. But if you really dig into our salary structure and the benefits that we get, it's just amazing when you consider like the hours that we definitely put in hours when we need to, when there is, some major litigation deadline or, a big rulemaking or whatever it might be. But generally, I mean, my managers are so respectful of our time when we take time off, when there's childcare issues. Even just, I mean, my office, it's rare that people are staying past 6 o'clock. So I think that's like an awesome part of the job as well. And then the difficulty, I would say, is kind of what I mentioned before. Although you're getting all this autonomy, it comes with a lot of work. I have to teach myself stuff all the time, whether that's like technical skills because we, have limited resources on the technical side, or whether that's, because my practice is so broad, I might get a case where I've never worked with these regulations before, and I need to spend a day just teaching myself that area of the law and getting up to speed. Granted, I have great colleagues I can reach out to who maybe have worked in that area and would be happy to help me. Just the other day, I had a standing question and I emailed Ryland, and we're having a call tomorrow and he's going to help me. So there is a resource pool to draw on, but it's, I mean, at something like a larger firm or a company or even some nonprofits, there might be a bankruptcy practice group or a corporations practice group down the hall that you can go talk to. And here it's a little more tricky than that.
I would echo a lot of what others are saying. I think in terms of the best parts of the job, I touched on this earlier, but I think it's sort of getting to work with people who bring a lot of different kinds of skills and backgrounds to the work. And another part of it is the autonomy that others have mentioned. I noticed that even sort of when I first started, like we of course have, a management structure and all of that within our office, but a lot of our work day to day is working with our program clients directly and getting to really delve into their issues, building those relationships, a lot of which turn out to be sort of long-term relationships and teamwork with those folks. So that part of it is really fulfilling, really interesting. And I would say the sort of the hardest part is kind of the flip side of that. There's an amazing range of things that EPA does. I feel like I've been here now almost 10 years and I'm still learning about sort of new parts of EPA or new programs or initiatives that we do. And often, especially as lawyers and maybe especially in OGC, there might be an issue that some office has been working on for a very long time that has a real history, comes out of a complicated statutory or regulatory structure and all of that, and now they need to consult with us on a specific issue, and so we need to come up to speed on all of that, often very quickly, feel confident in the advice that we're giving, being respectful of sort of the expertise that everyone else has and what they've been doing for all this time. So, I think it definitely can be a lot of work, but you also feel like you are always learning. Every day is different, and both sort of learning in terms of your own skills and expertise, but also like learning about the agency, continuing to meet a lot of new people across the agency. And so I think a lot of there are a lot of really great things about the job, and some of what's hard is sort of like the extreme parts of what overall makes it a really great and fulfilling place to work.
Thanks, everybody. I think I can basically echo what everybody has said. I'll just add a couple more things. One, Amanda mentioned this as well, but the level of responsibility I think is really extraordinary. I'm at my fourth year at the agency, and I started after a clerkship, and right before that was law school. So 1 year into my job here, I was assigned to interpret a section of the Clean Air Act that had never been interpreted before by any court or by the agency, and I authored like a 5-page interpretation of that, which the agency published as its interpretation in the Federal Register, which I thought was super cool. And then 2 years in, I was principal attorney on a rulemaking that regulates renewable fuel use over the entire United States, like a multi-billion-dollar program. And I was like I guess really the only staff attorney in my office assigned to that project and doing that. So that was amazing. The other thing I want to mention, which I think folks haven't touched on as much yet, is as a counseling attorney, I think in particular, I counsel on policies that I really agree with and think are amazing, and also policies that I personally might not agree with and might think are absolutely terrible. And this is something that occurs regardless of the administration. I think if you were to ask any counseling attorney, are you 100% on board with every policy you're working on right now? I think the vast majority of them would say no at almost every point in their career. And that's just part of the job, that sometimes you feel like you are doing work that really advances public health and environmental protection in the way that you believe is right and good, and you're having a huge impact. And other times you're counseling clients on creative litigation tactics or creative rationales for doing things that you might think are completely wrongheaded. And that is just that's part of the job. That we're not here to decide policies as attorneys for the most part. We're here to advise clients, particularly as a counseling attorney. So let me move on to our last question before we go on to the audience Q&A, which is, what tips do you have for folks who want to get a job here? What are you, or your offices, what are you guys looking for?
I can jump in and start. So I came to EPA through a USA Jobs posting. That was kind of the first and only way that I heard about the position. And now I've also been a little bit on the other side in getting to review applications and cover letters and resumes that we get. And definitely we get a lot from a lot of really, really qualified people. I would say one thing that does make a difference is when an applicant really shows that they understand the position that they're applying for, that specific position or opening, sort of what office is it in, what kind of work would you be doing, and then showing why your interests fit that position. I mean, even the 4 of us here today, the work we do, even though we're all at EPA, is obviously very different because we're all in different roles. Across the federal government, there's lots of different environmental law positions, and the work that we do is very different than positions at DOJ and their environmental groups. So I think showing that you understand the position and that you're really interested in that work, I think that part definitely makes a big difference. So tailoring your cover letter and all of that really to to the position and sort of gathering all the information that you can about it. Often the postings actually are very detailed in terms of describing what you'd be doing. The EPA website has a lot of information on our structure and different components and things like that. So that's probably the main piece of advice that I would give.
And I have some very practical tips that my office management asked me to pass along. First, if you want to be aware of a posting, the best thing to do is to create a profile on USA Jobs. And then anytime something pops up that's within your grade or series range, you'll get the alert and you'll be able to apply. As Aditi said, it's important in crafting your application to try to hit all of the elements of the position that's posted. So there are going to be keywords in that application package, and you're going to want to try to work as many of those in to your online submission as possible. A very important tip that I actually hadn't realized until today is that it's really important to try to get your application in early. Some positions will be set to only receive a certain number of applicants. And once that number is hit, if you're on the other side of it, your application just isn't going to be seen. The computer automatically throws out anything over the threshold. So absolutely do not wait until the last minute. If you're interested in something, jump on it and get your application in early in order to be considered for the job. So those are my very practical how-tos on how to try to get on the right side of the system and get considered on the merits.
I'd probably make 2 points. I also probably sit on about every panel of hiring, if there is any in our particular law office. And one of the things that I do look for, and I think that the panel would look for, is we see a lot of resumes that seem to be very task oriented, right? They seem to focus on, for example, I help draft and negotiate contracts. Okay, so that's generally what some lawyers do, right? What we look more for is accomplishments. What was the result, right? How do we transform that into, I drafted and negotiating contracts, which resulted in, right, a cost savings of X, Y, and Z, or a benefit of A, B, and C. To the extent that you can create or draft more of an accomplishment or results-driven resume, I think you'll go a long way, right? I'd certainly be more interested, if I were a panelist, in looking at a resume and constantly showing what benefit or value add that I added to whatever organization that I was in, as opposed to someone who just kind of bullets out what are the generic tasks that I may have accomplished in that job. So that's just kind of one tip that I would keep in mind. The second thing that I would say is I mentioned earlier that I came in through the summer honors program, and I'm not saying that everybody will have that opportunity, but I think what I learned from there is networking, okay? You want to be able to do as much networking as you can. I get, for some strange reason, maybe it's not so strange, random calls from people who might have heard that, hey, I heard you do employment law work, and would you mind having a conversation with me about it? Sure, I'll take the time to do it. I get them quite frequently, as a matter of fact. A lot of them maybe come from my law school, but some come from, maybe a recommendation of a recommendation. But I think that a large part of why I was able to land the employment law job was because during my tenure in the summer honors program, I focused on making sure I can touch as many people as I can, and that people, had the opportunity to do assignments. And then I think finally, always the writing element and the analysis element is going to always be front and center. Most people think, oh, they might not look at that writing sample. I'll tell you, my management is very particular about analysis because that's kind of the catalyst for what we do. We've got to convince a judge, right, in an administrative form such as the EEOC and MSPB. We want you to rule in favor of the agency. And that comes through very, very clear, concise, and persuasive writing. And so to the extent that you can bring out in a writing sample your strengths in your persuasive writing or your interpretive writing, I would encourage you to focus on those elements in the writing sample. So those would kind of be my 3 tips.
I'll echo the last one and add a couple. Yeah, I think your writing is incredibly important. And so choosing a writing sample that, like Aditi said, shows that you understand what that position is going to be doing. So I was working in OGC in the water law office for the last year. And a huge part of my work there is taking a legal issue, being able to present it in a concise, clear way, and being able to convey the different options. So here's one way we could interpret this. Here's the litigation risk with doing that. Here's the possible outcomes that would result if we did that. Then option 2, a different way to interpret it. Here's the litigation risk with that interpretation or that path and the outcomes with that path. So showing like your analytical skills. But like Merrick said, if the position is one which is going to involve a lot of advocacy on a regular basis, then maybe you should be looking at a writing sample that is more in that direction. But either way, your writing sample is definitely important. And I think that really doing your research to understand the position you're applying for is important. Whether that's by reaching out to people who work at EPA or who know people who work at EPA and can explain it to you, or by looking at the website and doing reading, that's something that you should take the time to do. I also think to the extent that you can spend one of your summers or semesters either at EPA or one of our client agencies, or I should say related agencies, like the Corps, Fish and Wildlife Service, state entities that work with us regularly, DOJ, because at the end of the day, the world's a lot smaller than you think it is. And if there is any line on your resume where someone can speak to your quality of service, that somebody at EPA can talk to that person and sort of know them and trust them, that's going to go a long way. So for instance, if you know that you wanted to apply to my office in Chicago, then we have pretty good relationships with the states that we work with, Illinois, Michigan, Indiana, Wisconsin, etc. And so if I see on your resume that you worked at Michigan's environmental department for a summer in their legal division, like I might not know directly someone there, but I can find somebody in the agency who knows someone there, who I can call them up and say, hey, do you remember your intern from such and such summer? And they'll be able to tell me great things about you. So even if you can't spend a summer at EPA, consider spending a summer somewhere that works with us, that we have that relationship with. And then the last one comes back again to sort of Aditi's point on knowing the position, which is I think that a lot of offices in EPA are looking for people who have thoughtfully applied because this is where they want to be long term. This is where they want to spend their career. It's not necessarily the same as other places where they're okay if you come for a few years and decide it's not for you and want to do something else. Yes, the fellowships can be structured that way depending on the office within EPA, but I think generally a lot of our offices, we see it as a career investment. And so to the extent that your application can show you have thought about, okay, do I want to live in this city for the next 10 years? Do I have family ties here? Is there a reason why? I don't think it's maybe as important for DC and the DC offices, because sort of a lot of people in DC are transplants. But we have a lot of regional offices, Boston, Philly, Atlanta, Seattle, Denver, all over the country. And so to the extent if you're applying to one of those offices to show like, okay, I have given some thought to the idea of being in this area for a long time, to investing in this as my career and not just an experience I want to have. I think that can go a long way.
All right, we only have about 10 minutes, but I'm actually going to add my answer to this question because we got at least 10 audience questions about tips for hiring. So I'm going to try to hit most of those with my answer. So I'll start by saying I agree with everything folks said. One person asked the question of, do you have to be in a top 14 law school to get a job here? The answer is absolutely not. We just hired like 10 people in my office in the last few months, and I think most of them were not from top 14 law schools. Another question that several folks asked is, well, how much of an environmental kind of work background do I need to have if I've been out of law school for a few years? And I'd say for that, it's definitely important to show that you have environmental interest, whether that's through what you did in law school or your current job, or even if your current job isn't doing environmental work, that you're still kind of plugged into the field in some way. And you might do that, for instance, by being involved with the environmental part of your local bar association, or by writing some type of publication about environmental laws or policies, or just staying up to date on what's happening in the field and being able to convey that fluently in your interview. Demonstrate a commitment to public service is also really important. And again, that doesn't mean you have to be a government employee to come to the EPA, but it does mean that it is helpful to have some public service experience or commitment earlier on in your career, whether that's in law school or in some employment opportunity. Let's see. I think that actually hits most of the questions that folks asked. We have about 8 minutes left, and I want to reserve a few minutes at the end for folks to talk about hiring opportunities, but there is one question from the audience I'd like for folks to speak about quickly. And the question is, as a low-income student who could face hundreds of thousands of dollars in law school loans, I'm concerned that having a legal career that would be sound financially. Given this, how feasible is it to have a career at EPA or government in general? And if folks could provide a brief answer to this question, or just raise your hand as somebody who the questioner can contact if they want more information, that'd be great.
I can go ahead and kick things off. And I'll start by saying I was you. So I see you and I hear you, and I absolutely understand that concern. Part of the reason, not entirely, but part of the reason I went to private practice following law school is to pay down my loans. I put myself through school, and working in the private sector helped me do that quickly. But the wage that I make now at EPA, well, far, far less than the wage that I made in the private sector, is still solid and more than allows me to put a roof over my head. I've been incredibly appreciative over the past 6 months, seeing the uncertainty in the job field generally, knowing that I have a job that is secure, that I love, that allows me to work on a day-to-day basis in pursuit of a mission about which I'm passionate, and I know will be there in the months to come. So if I were still in the private sector, I would be making considerably more money than I'm making at the agency. However, I am making a really good living, and there are some incredible benefits that come from the job security and from, again, the ability to be able to do on a day-to-day basis something that I love. But I would be happy to talk to the questioner on a personal level if you like, or anyone else out there who has similar concerns. As I said, I was you, I hear you, and yeah, I made it, and I think you probably can too.
Yeah, I think it's definitely possible, especially, I mean, obviously it's more difficult, but I think that Ryland's point, we hire from all sorts of law schools all across the country. You do not have to go to a top 14 law school and take on the debt that I took on. I mean, certainly either path, you could take on that debt and spend some time paying it off at a law firm. That is definitely one way, and that does not exclude you from working at EPA by any means. But you could also go to a smaller law school where your debt would be less. And there's things that you could do. I mean, if you took a job as a paralegal, for instance, in between undergrad and law school, built some networking ties, like Merrick mentioned, in the legal community, got to understand what lawyers in whatever city you're working do, and build those ties and go to a law school that's in the city where you want to work. I think you can definitely make it here just the same, although I recognize definitely is harder.
Yeah, and I know for me, just echoing, I'll admit, I went to a tier 3 law school. I graduated from a historically Black college and university law school. I did it because of cost, right? At the end of the day, we all get a bar roll number if you work hard, right? If you put in the work and put in the effort. I was also concerned about, the mounds and mounds of debt, and I just wanted to avoid it at all costs, which is why I kind of focused on more of my academic excellence so that I can get those scholarships, that my law school offered while I was there, which I did get a number of them. And, also through my clerkships, for those who were fortunate to get paid clerkships, which majority of those I did, I was kind of able to support myself during law school and carry some of those, over. So I just think it's kind of what you make it, right? I know that there are, again, people who come from different law schools all over the country. I really think it comes to you, right? How bad do you want it? And making the right decisions for you, and just keeping your eye on the prize. And I think if you keep that kind of attitude, honestly, I know that financials are a big piece and getting and landing that gig. But I have to say that getting the job at EPA really came for, I wrote it, it was on my bathroom mirror after I, finished the summer honors program. It's like, I'm going to work at EPA. And I saw it every morning when I brushed my teeth. And so, I just think that's what it's about. And I really think it'll work out in the end.
All right, well, it's 1:58, and I think that's a great note for us to end on. So we'll spend the next couple of minutes talking very briefly about job opportunities right now. So in the Office of General Counsel, which is the office that Aditi, Merrick, and myself that we work in, where we do counseling and defense litigation work, applications are open right now for summer law clerks for next summer. So this is if you're a rising 2L, please apply by the end of August. I will leave the URL in the chat. You can also just Google EPA OGC Summer Honors Program and find that. Amanda or Kelly, are there any opportunities you guys would like to share?
Yes, so we expect to be advertising in the next month or two some permanent postings, and the best way to find those is on USA Jobs, as I mentioned earlier. OECA also has a very strong program for clerks, fall, spring, and winter. That is run by a woman named Robin Robinson, and I can give her your details if you're interested after the program. And I'll just wrap up with a message that my management wanted me to convey here, which is that we have a really strong interest in diversifying our workforce. We're looking actively to expand our pool so that we're representative of all people and unique and diverse backgrounds colors, genders, orientations, other perspectives. My management means this. I believe they mean it. And it's an active focus of our office. We believe in OECA that creating an organization staffed with people who bring different perspectives and experiences and backgrounds to the workplace provides us with better results and frankly just a healthier workspace.
Yeah, I think we would certainly echo that sentiment, Kelly. And as far as specific opportunities, this one's actually in OECA, but I was asked to give a plug for it. Another part of EPA that's sort of, you wouldn't think EPA, we have a whole criminal division. And so currently there's a posting in the Office of Criminal Enforcement for the legal counsel division in that office. The criminal side of our work is really fascinating. You get to work with criminal investigators and then partnering with criminal assistant United States attorneys across the country to bring criminal cases. So that position is on USA Jobs. If you look in the Office of Enforcement and Compliance Assurance, Office of Criminal Enforcement. Currently, my region is hiring for a paralegal. So maybe if you're listening to this call and you haven't started law school yet and you're not sure, you can come work as a paralegal at EPA and get a really great idea of the work we do and get to experience the mission. As far as our permanent and honors attorney hiring, as well as our summer clerks, we do have all three of those programs. They tend to post the applications a little bit later. Historically, our job cycle has been around Christmas or just after Christmas is when you'll see postings for our that summer's externs or for honors fellows that would start that following fall. And we have been pretty consistently also seeking, in addition to honors attorneys, a 1 or 2 permanent attorneys. So now is a great time to be looking to work at EPA. A large number of my region, and I believe the overall workforce, is very close to retirement. So we will have a lot of turnover in the next few years, and that should all be on USA Jobs. And I know we post to our regional website, so you can always go to the Region 5 website too to just double check for postings.
Great. Well, thank you all again. Thank you to the panelists, and thank you to the audience members for joining us. Again, if you're interested in following up with any one of us, please feel free to do so. It's just lastname.firstname@epa.gov. My email is also pasted into the chat, so if you have a hard time finding somebody, just email me and I can redirect you. So back to you, Caitlin.
Thank you so much, Ryland. A really enormous thank you to our outstanding panelists. We're so appreciative of you sharing your expertise and your leadership with us for today's program. I also really want to thank our participants for joining us. We saw so many great questions and tried to get to most of them. So thank you so much. And we do encourage you to continue to learn about the many amazing career opportunities at EPA. Thank you all so much, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Thanks
Bye,
so much.
everybody.
Thanks.